In the heart of New York City, amidst the bustling streets and towering skyscrapers, there's an alleyway hidden in plain sight. A narrow, cobblestone passageway flanked by graffiti-covered walls. It's easy to miss if you're not looking for it. But if you happen to stumble upon it, as Emma Carter did one summer afternoon, you'll find yourself transported to a different world. A world where time seems to stand still, where the echoes of laughter and the sound of music carry on the wind, and where the scent of paint mingles with the aroma of street food. It was here that Emma, a talented young artist pursuing her dreams, met James Parker, a passionate and ambitious journalist, before they both embarked on their respective journeys to college. Their connection was instant, a spark that lit up the alleyway and made the world around them feel a little brighter. But as they parted ways, the weight of societal expectations and the uncertainty of the future bearing down on them, they knew that their time together was all too brief. Years later, Emma and James' lives had taken vastly different paths. Emma had become a successful and sought-after graphic designer, while James had built a name for himself as an investigative journalist, chasing down stories that others were too afraid to touch. Despite the distance and the passing of time, their memories of that summer afternoon remained vivid, a constant reminder of what could have been. And then, in a twist of fate that neither of them could have predicted, they found themselves back in the same city, back in the same alleyway where it all began. As they stood there, amidst the familiar graffiti and the echoes of laughter, the memories came flooding back, and with them came the realization that the feelings they once shared were still there, still strong. But now, their lives were so different. Emma was engaged to a successful entrepreneur, and James was deeply entangled in a high-profile investigation. The choices they had made, the paths they had chosen, seemed to conspire against them, making it impossible to be together. Still, despite the obstacles, they found themselves drawn to each other, unable to resist the pull of their shared history and the undeniable spark that still burned between them. They began to meet in secret, sneaking away from their responsibilities to steal moments together in the alleyway, reliving the past and dreaming of a future that could be theirs if they dared to seize it. But as James' investigation intensified and Emma's wedding date drew closer, the weight of their choices and the consequences of their actions began to bear down upon them. They knew that they had to make a decision, to choose between the lives they had built and the love they once shared. It was a choice that would change everything, a choice that would shape the rest of their lives, and one that they knew they couldn't make lightly. As they stood there in the shadows of the alleyway, the city around them a blur of neon lights and moving shadows, Emma and James knew that their time together had come. They had to face the future head-on, to confront the choices they had made and the lives they had built, and to decide once and for all if their love was strong enough to survive. The question hung in the air, unspoken but understood. Would they choose happiness, or would they choose duty? The answer, they knew, would change everything. Their decision was made all the more difficult by the fact that they both had so much to lose. Emma had built a successful career, had carved out a place for herself in the world, and had found someone who loved her, who cherished her, and who wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. And yet, despite all this, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. That there was a piece of her heart that only James could complete. James felt the same way. He had dedicated his life to uncovering the truth, to holding the powerful accountable, and to making a difference in the world. But as he stood there in the alleyway, he realized that there was another truth, a deeper truth, that he had been ignoring all along. The truth that love, real love, was more important than anything else. The truth that he could not go on without Emma by his side. With a deep breath, James reached out and took Emma's hand, squeezing it gently. "I love you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I've always loved you." Tears welled up in her eyes as she nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I love you too," she whispered back. "I've never stopped." And with those words, they knew. They knew that they could no longer live apart, that they could not ignore the feelings that bound them together. They knew that they had to find a way to be together, to forge a new path for themselves, no matter the obstacles that lay ahead. For in the end, it was not duty or obligation that mattered most, it was love. It was the fire that burned brightest in the darkest of times, the light that guided them home. With a determination born of desperation and hope, they began to plan. They would have to be careful, cautious, but they were willing to take the risks necessary to be together. They knew that their decision would change everything, but they also knew that they could not continue to live apart, that their love was too powerful to ignore. Emma and James spent hours poring over maps, plotting escape routes, and discussing ways to cover their tracks. They knew that they had to be methodical and careful, for any misstep could prove disastrous. As they worked together, their fingers brushing against each other's, their hearts racing in tandem, they felt a newfound sense of purpose and strength. They were in this together, and nothing could tear them apart. Finally, the day arrived. It was a moonless night, shrouded in clouds, the perfect cover for their escape. They met in the alleyway as planned, their bodies pressed together in the shadows, their hearts pounding wildly in their chests. With one final, trembling breath, they kissed, their lips parting as their tongues tangled together, a desperate plea for connection in the darkness. Hand in hand, they raced through the city, weaving through the streets like two ghosts, invisible in the night. They ducked into back alleys and hidden passageways, using their knowledge of the city's underbelly to their advantage. With each step they took, they felt a newfound sense of freedom, a weight lifting from their shoulders as they left their old lives behind them. At last, they reached their destination, a secluded cabin deep in the woods, far from the prying eyes of the world. It was a place where they could be together, where they could start anew, free from the constraints of society and the expectations that had held them back. As they stepped inside, the scent of pine and the sound of the wind rustling through the trees enveloped them, welcoming them to their new life. Their clothes discarded, they fell into each other's arms, their bodies a tangle of limbs and desire. The air around them crackled with electricity as they explored each other, their lips and fingers and skin seeking out new sensations, new ways to express the depth of their feelings. In the flickering light of a candle, they made love, their movements fluid and graceful, a dance of passion and devotion. As the night wore on, they collapsed into each other's embrace, exhausted but content. For the first time in what seemed like an eternity, they felt truly alive, truly themselves. They had taken a leap of faith, and somehow, miraculously, they had landed on their feet. Together. As they drifted off to sleep, they knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. They were a team, a partnership, and nothing could tear them apart. The days that followed were a whirlwind of discovery and adaptation. They learned to forage for food in the woods, to build fires, to hunt and fish. They also discovered the joys of simple pleasures, like reading by candlelight or playing cards by the fire. The cabin became their sanctuary, a place where they could escape from the world and just be together. They talked about their past lives, about their families and friends, about the things they had missed and the things they had learned. As time went on, they began to feel a sense of purpose, of meaning. They knew that they were not just running away from their responsibilities, but running towards something more. They were forging a new path for themselves, one that was built on love and trust and mutual respect. They knew that the world outside might never understand or accept their choice, but they didn't care. They had each other, and that was all that mattered. One day, as they were walking hand in hand through the woods, they came across a small clearing filled with wildflowers. In the center of the clearing was a stone, weathered by time and the elements. As they approached, they noticed that someone had carved a heart into the stone, and within the heart, the words Emma and James. It was then that they realized that they had created their own little piece of heaven, a place where they could be together and build a life filled with love and happiness. The years passed, and their lives in the cabin continued much as they had before. They faced challenges and adversity, but they faced them together. They grew old, their bodies weathered by time and the elements, but their love remained as strong as ever. As they lay in bed on their last night together, surrounded by the flickering light of candles, Emma took James' hand and smiled softly. "You know," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "I've often wondered what our story would have been like if we had found each other sooner." James squeezed her hand gently. "I've wondered that too," he said, "but I don't think it would have mattered. I don't think anything could have kept us apart." And with that, they drifted off to sleep, secure in the knowledge that they had found their home, their purpose, and most importantly, their love.